angels waging war in the unseen realm. Global events fulfilling biblical prophecy. Eternal life. What lies beyond mortality? From analyzing the paranormal from a biblical worldview to the discussion of cutting-edge science and technology, conspiracy, discovery, special investigative reports. Unafraid to explore the challenging issues facing humanity. Welcome to another edition of Skywatch TV.
Hi folks, this is Tom Horn coming to you week 2 actually, in probably the most fantastic, most interesting conversation I can remember in a long time with my very good friends Steve Quayle and Timothy Alberino. Great to have you guys back again, Steve.
Well, it's wonderful to be here, and as you know, Tom, we do like 30-minute introductions. So now we've got to get to some of the most interesting information that's out there. And again, I want to make it clear to everyone, our goal, Tom, is to not only just show that obviously there were giants in those days, we're talking about following a theme of cover-up of the true history of the world, the role that giants played, and what possibly does anyone have to gain by keeping this stuff to themselves. Well, let me show, and I just want to show a picture, and then we're going to turn it over to Tim. This is an interesting picture that was drawn, an illustration by a pilot that came out of Afghanistan. And basically, he was talking about the dead giant, this particular giant, and this was a scene that was described to him by the military. Well, after this group of Marines was pretty much murdered and, let's just say this, eaten, the point being is they had to send a specialized team in there, and the actual letter that the pilot who flew the dead giant, 2005, out of Afghanistan is incorporated in the Long Walkers book, which we're going to make available to people.
Right. Yeah, we're going to be making that book available to them for free. And I think that image is also partly part of the cover. On the cover, if I was to spread this out and essentially break the book, you'd see him on the ground there dead in front of a bunch of Marines. And I also understand that there's been some some threats against the life of the pilot or something like that.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And Tim can attest to that, because in both Sardinia and in South America, they were always followed, and I'll let him tell. But here's the central theme. As Tim has been able to interview eyewitnesses to the extraction of the giants, both in Sardinia and South America, but it's fascinating that a lot of those elderly people are now dying, and with them their stories, and even their younger, in this case, Tim, tell the story about the guy on the raft in Lake Titicaca, because that's a good example of actual eyewitness testimony.
And just before you do, for those that may not understand what we're talking about at this moment, it's this brand new documentary, actually, that Timothy Alberino lived in Peru for 10 years. Steve Quayle, the Gen 6 Productions, True Legends, the documentary film series. This is the very first entry. It's a large budget production called The Technology of the Fallen. We already knew, based on some research, some of this information in Peru that's been available for some time, but then you went there, Timothy, and some very interesting things. I mean, I think God gave you favor because you're asking officials if they ever saw giants, if there was any proof. We talked about this on the last show, and they actually give you access to the historical library, from the 1500s that have the stories, the chronicles of the conquistadors talking about these giants, right, that were in the land, and you have that in the documentary film.
Exactly. Yeah, and that's one of the fascinating things. People say, "Oh, there's no cover-up." Well, if there's no cover-up, then somebody explain to me why so many historians have pored over these documents in order to write the history of the conquest and have completely omitted all of this information about giants and giant bones. And the story from the historians is that, well, they disregard the bones because people were commonly mistaking mastodon bones and giant sloth bones for giant bones, which is false. That's on its face false, because in these documents, these guys are finding the heads. Mm-hmm. And there's no way anybody is going to mistake a mastodon skull with that of a human being. They're finding the heads. And not only that, the giants built villages, they built houses, they dug wells, especially in the case of the giants that landed on the peninsula of Santa Elena, which is now part of Ecuador. Those giants built houses and dug wells that during the time of the conquest and after, the remains of their houses were still there.
So you're saying the giant sloth probably didn't build a house and drill the wells?
Unless mastodons and giant sloths can build houses and dig wells, then we're dealing with giants.
And I can imagine, though, some people watching this program, they're going to say this question: well, if there were giants in the earth in those days, I guess if you believe the Bible, then you believe this, right? What happened to the bones? Where'd they go?
Well, exactly where we've always thought that they go. Exactly what we've always thought happened to the bones is what's borne out in the historical record. In fact, there's a Jesuit priest named Pablo Jose Arriaga, very famous guy, and he came over in the early 1600s into Peru, was sent by probably the Spanish, the Catholic Church operating in Spain. And his job was to exterminate idolatry in Peru. And he wasn't alone. He was also accompanied by what were called the visitadores, the official inspectors that came from the state of Spain, from the Kingdom of Spain, were accompanying him, and they were exterminating idolatry in Peru, along with the Inquisition, which was immediately established in Lima after the conquest of the Inca. And so as Pablo Jose Arriaga is going around getting rid of the natives' idols, burning their shrines and all this, they began to realize that the natives were worshiping the giants. And they weren't just worshiping little idols of the giants, they were actually worshiping the corpses of giants. And they had the corpses enshrined. And there's a story that Pablo Jose Arriaga, along with the official inspectors, this is well documented, went into a cave, found 3 massive giants and many dead bodies around the giants, which were sacrificed to the giants. The giants were dead. It was their bodies, possibly mummified. And these giants seem to have had elongated skulls, which is interesting because the natives say that those were their progenitors. In other words, the giants were the progenitors of the natives, and the natives worshiped the giants. And these giants were massive, definitely over 15 feet tall, possibly up to 30 feet tall. They were burned. Why were they burned? Pablo Jose Arriaga and the official inspectors were exterminating idolatry. They were worshiping the giants. They burned the bones. They incinerated them. But many of the bones also went to Lima and ended up in the office of the secretary of the Holy Inquisition. We're talking about the Spanish Inquisition, so the worst kind of Inquisition, which is obviously a branch of the Vatican itself. And so, as we found in Sardinia, and as we've believed for a long time, the bones are incinerated when they're found, or they're sent to the Vatican.
Well, it seems like there might be also a little bit of this Inquisition still going on, because as I understand it, while you were over there on this trip, you were followed. There was maybe some presence, the Vatican presence there remaining to this day.
Everybody, Tom, that Tim spoke to always was looking over their shoulder. They were always basically aware of the unseen presence, even in talking about helicopters coming in and excavating the bones of the giants. One of the gentlemen, I won't use his name to bring any heat on him, but they were deathly afraid of that unseen hand. Ladies and gentlemen, they do not want you to know the true history of the world. They who control the history of the world control the future presentation of whatever they want. It's kind of like a giant Hegelian lie. It's like the Smithsonian. Why does the Smithsonian cover up all of the artifacts? And why are people today, Tom, who unearth giants threatened? The most dangerous thing to the people in the world that want to bring about the alien deception is the truth. So the very people that believe they inherited that genetic bloodline, meaning the controllers of the world, Illuminati, globalists, or whatever, they are ready to launch, to thrust under the earth, the most devastating, I would say, lie, the biggest lie in history. And unfortunately, a lot of people are going to believe it. So this is what the expedition, this is what True Legends Technology of Fallen, this is what, by the grace of God, either our 9th or however many episodes we have to produce. This is what it's all about.
Now, as I understand it, too, by the way, the conquistadors with the sword, we talked about that in the first program. They pushed the sword through the eye to the back side of the head. You were able to estimate that would have been about 30 to 32.
And let me just do this, too, because we're down here. The fact is that you hold that. This is a sword. Again, this is a forgive me. It's a
Shell-hilt rapier.
Yeah, cup hilt rapier. And even the design of this was carried into the later sword, but 41 inches this blade is. And if you get the feel for that, you've got to understand how big the head was. The head on a 36-foot giant was 6 feet from the neck to the top of the cranium, and that was, they were also, those giant skulls were also very, very, what's the word? They were elongated skulls.
And you have a friend now in Hollywood, and there's a company there. You're actually having them recreate this 6 foot tall, 40-inch wide skull, right?
Absolutely, because it's really difficult for people to even embrace that. And again, when I updated Genesis 6 Giants, the second volume, I incorporated the oldest known documents that I could find. And what I found still wasn't even on the level of the accuracy of the conquistadors. So what's important for people to understand is this. When we went to Sardinia, I just asked Tim when we were taking a break, I said, how long did it take us to pull that expedition together? He said about a week. When we get leads, we want to follow them because obviously there are people that want to shut us down. And when Tim and the crew were explaining who they were followed by in Sardinia, you'd swear the guy watched Raiders of the Lost Ark and didn't know how to dress himself, okay? Meaning that it was just the classic, I don't think he had the same manners. But share with this, Tim, share with them why Sardinia and explain the whole situation with Francis Bacon.
So let me interrupt just for a moment, Steve, because I do want to talk about Francis Bacon. I actually want to know, you get into Sardinia, there's evidence there of this, this whole global story about Atlantis and all of that. And if we get time, I do want to cover that. But I had a couple of questions for you. One, when do you think Puma Punku was actually constructed? And tell me about what you found there.
Well, we simply concur with the Inca and with the conquistadors and with the chroniclers who first came on, the first Westerners really to come upon Tiwanaku and Puma Punku. And they believed that the builders of Puma Punku were a pre-flood civilization, that some of them were giants. That's what they believe. We're not putting words into their mouth. That's what the Inca believed, and that's what a lot of the chroniclers believed. This is a pre-flood civilization that was probably giants and other things, because entities with elongated skulls have been discovered there. But there's also, a lot of people don't know that there's actually records of giant bones being unearthed right underneath Tiwanaku, heads and all. And that's something that nobody really talks about.
Well, you was telling me that you thought that Tiwanaku was a farce. I mean, and then we got cut off. You didn't get your chance to explain.
Yeah, I do believe it's a farce, and I'll explain why. Tiwanaku, it's kind of confusing, probably confuses people because the whole site is called Tiwanaku. That's the native word for it, but the Spanish pronunciation of that was more like Tiwanaku. So Tiwanaku became the town. And then Puma Punku is actually part of the whole Tiwanaku area. And it's only a couple hundred yards away from the rest of everything else that you see on Ancient Aliens and other documentaries that feature that area. But what's interesting, and what nobody else has ever mentioned, and we couldn't believe that no one's ever pointed this out, is that at some of the famous structures in Tiwanaku, such as the Temple of Kalasasaya, which are obviously post-flood constructions and are on a completely different level than what you find at Puma Punku. A lot of people do recognize that. Puma Punku is way older than the rest of the structures that are at Tiwanaku, including the Temple of Kalasasaya. And at Kalasasaya, we were finding artifacts that seem to us to have been brought over from the Puma Punku location, which is much older, and literally staged at the Kalasasaya temple, which is post-flood for sure. And that was obviously very suspicious. Why would they do that? And when I say stage, I mean like there'd be like a bunch of sandstone blocks literally piled up on the side of the walkway with a big andesite megalithic block that belongs over at Puma Punku.
Well, and I had known that many years ago they had repaired the Gate of the Sun. Part of it had collapsed. They put it. But what I didn't know, you're telling me, is they actually moved it.
It wasn't there. Yeah, and they make a point to say, this is what the guides say. We were listening to all the guides that were there. They were saying that the Gate of the Sun was found here in the Temple of Kalasasaya, which is in the post-flood area of Tiwanaku. They made a point to say this was found here. But we had a guy with us, sort of an insider, a engineer from Peru, from Puno, not far away, across the border, and he told us that's a flat-out lie. Because he was young enough to be there when it wasn't there, when it was somewhere else. And he said they moved it. And he told us they've been staging things. They're moving things.
Now, why are they doing it? Why are they?
Here's why they're doing it. Because one of the biggest cover-up, if not the biggest cover-up, and it relates to everything. It relates to our documentary. It relates to UFOs. It relates to everything, is the reality of the pre-flood world. The reality of the world before the flood of Noah. People cannot accept it.
You're saying that if they leave these artifacts where they are, there is an obvious
obvious.
and then an obvious newer,
which is copying
pre-flood
the old.
and post-flood.
Yep.
But by mixing the two together, they can confuse
They're
people,
sowing
and then they're
confusion.
selling an idea.
Right, and they're covering up the truth. You know, the word in all of our investigations, the same thing in your research, my research, our collective research expedition, it's the cover-up. They're afraid of something, and they are totally afraid of the truth. And also in Bolivia, and I want to throw this in because it's cool, there was an announcement of a whole civilization that predated even that which you see, where Tim, and it was pyramids. Well, the government now has made it very difficult, and you know, thank God I didn't have to go try and bail these guys out or send a team in to get them out of a Bolivian prison. But that's the thing. They will cover it up at all costs, because why? Well, right now, governments are paying big money for ancient artifacts, and someday we'll do a story, Tom, on just the artifacts in Desert Storm. You told the story on the radio program, but it's a big deal because we're talking about ancient technology. We're not talking about the Aztec, Inca, and Mayan, whose weapons were so primitive that obviously they couldn't stand against the conquistadors. And even then, here's the deal. They'll talk about the Aztec Empire, the Mayan Empire, the Incan Empire, meaning traditional historians, and even those guys didn't admit they built all the stuff that they're credited with building. They said, we didn't build it. Take it from there.
Well, I do want to ask you about Sardinia, but one other quick thing, because I'd only caught a part of this where you guys were talking about where parts of this almost looked like the stone had been liquefied in some of this construction.
Yes, that's interesting. Yeah, that's in the second episode of our series.
Oh, so I'm really jumping the gun.
No, but that was we shot episode 1 and episode 2 during the same expedition. But it's interesting you mentioned that because it looks like the stones in, for example, the Great Wall of Sacsayhuaman outside of Cusco were poured into place, or somehow whoever built it was able to change the molecular structure of the rock to make it softer, to mold it like Play-Doh. But talking about Sardinia, what we found at Sardinia was on the outside of a lot of the megalithic structures, there is a layer of quartz. So in other words, there's a layer of crystal on the outside of the blocks. And they used to call Atlantis the Shining City. And we were told that it was some kind of to collect the power of the sun and to use it for some kind of an energy source. But it's amazing. Everywhere we went, all the megalithic structures had quartz, were lined with quartz.
So do experts that actually live there, now we're talking about educated men, educators, people that have PhDs or they're historians or they're whatever, that live in that area, are there any there that actually are suspicious?
No, it's absolutely, you can't talk about it. But the guys that we're with, they're from Sardinia, would always joke to us about how the richest people in Sardinia are the archaeologists. I actually asked one of the guys who dug up giant bones with the municipality in Sardinia.
Amazing
dug
stuff.
them up, and we're talking 9 to 12-foot giants. I asked him, well, what did they do with them? And he looked at me and he said, the Illuminati and the Vatican buy them.
Wow.
And that's why they say that the archaeologists are the richest guys in Sardinia.
Yeah.
Because they dig them up. They deny their existence, dig them up in the background and sell them.
Yeah, and of course we know that the Vatican has an interest in this worldwide. That was me and Chris Putnam going to the top of Mount Graham and finding out that that's considered to be a portal, and the Vatican was willing to fight all the way through federal court here in the United States to have a presence there. So we know that they do have that interest. We know they probably also have like bottomless pockets, right?
Sure,
so
yeah.
cash is not an issue, right?
Especially when you can print it and it's backed up by nothing.
Right, and you know, the Vatican archives are notoriously known around the world. I mean, this is higher security than the CIA. So, but you also, though, in the last program, you mentioned something about Francis Bacon. And some connection. And before we run out of time on this program today, I want you to say something.
Yeah, the connection with Francis Bacon is basically this idea of Atlantis, because there's good there's evidence to suggest that Sardinia was Atlantis. Now, I'm not saying it was, we're not saying that unequivocally, but there's evidence that points to the fact that it may in fact have been Atlantis, the site of Atlantis. There's huge pyramids, there's massive structures there. But listen, we were at an area in Sardinia where there was tombs. They actually call some of the places the tombs of the giants. And some tourists go over there, but there's places where nobody goes. It's just fenced off. And in front of the megalithic sites, they literally have planted rows of trees so you can't see them. From the villages, there's nothing to see here. You go behind them and they're giant tombs.
Oh, wow.
And so the connection with Atlantis, Atlantis was said to have a succession of rings around it, leading all the way down, riverways that led all the way down consecutively to the ocean. So you could come from the ocean, circle all the way around to the pinnacle of Atlantis. There's evidence of that kind of waterway on Sardinia. In fact, we found these massive old iron rings that were about 40 to 50 pounds, and they're sticking into megalithic structures where there is no river. In other words, there used to be a river there. And the guy that's doing research there said if you trace them, it loops around Sardinia, just like the description
spiral.
of it. Yeah, and I didn't believe him because I've done a lot of research on Atlantis. I thought everybody's going to say that where I live used to be Atlantis, So I didn't believe him until we're driving around the corner, and he's telling me the whole time, Tim, I think that Sardinia is Atlantis. Actually, he was just telling me, Tim, Sardinia was Atlantis. And I was kind of skeptical, and I still am. But we drive around the corner, and there's a pyramid. Just out of nowhere, I'm looking at a pyramid. And it's not a pyramid like the pyramids in Giza with the bare rock. It's covered with mud and grass by now. But it's a massive pyramid, and there's a castle, an old castle built on top. And I asked him, why have I never seen this? I mean, who knows about the huge pyramids in Sardinia? Hardly anybody. He said, you're not allowed. You're basically, the archaeologists, the historians aren't really allowed to talk about this stuff.
Yeah. This is episode number 1, Technology of the Fallen. True Legends. It's a brand new documentary series. As I understand it, the first project was fully funded, and I won't tell you how much money it took for them to do this, but it was a lot of money, and thank goodness that they were able to come up with it. We're making this available to you. We're the first ones that are doing televised programs on this for $24.95. Some of this research started with and then surpassed work that was done by our good friend David Flynn, who has now gone to be with the Lord. You can get this by itself. You can get the two of these together for $39.95. That's a $60 value, but during these programs, you can get those two together. On the next program, we're going to be talking about, Steve, your books, these things could be used for doing exercises. They're always so big. We're going to be talking about aliens and fallen angels. We're going to be talking about angel wars. And then one of my favorite subjects, we're going to be talking about xenogenesis, and this is going to explain CRISPR technology and other technologies. We're making these 3 books available. Normally, these 3 books by themselves would cost $128. They're $40 books. One of them's a $30 book. This is an $18 book, and this actually has the image in it of the giant that was flown out. You talked about it earlier in the program. We're giving you that book for free.
Yeah, Tom, that doesn't have the image. It has the letter from the actual pilot.
All right, so the letter from the actual pilot that worked to fly the giant out is replicated inside of this book. All 3 of these together with this free book would be $128 value. We're making them available to you for $99 during this program, all 4 of those books. And of course, if you want to buy everything that I just showed you, the True Legends documentary, the David Flynn collection, all 4 of those other books, which would be a $190 value. We've made a deal with our good friend Steve Quayle here. We can make those available to you for $129.95 if you want all of them. There they are, available in all kinds of different ways and collections for you to be able to get. We're going to have Steve Quayle's going to come back next week. We're going to continue shooting films about the documentary and the books that Steve's written. Timothy, Absolutely wonderful to have you on the
you for having
program
me.
with us for
Pleasure.
the last 2 weeks. Steve, great as always. Folks, continue to tune in. I think we've just gotten started. The legendary Steve Quayle and Timothy Alberino. You want to check this out. It's their brand new, it's Genesis 6, which is a production company. They're there, they're on the grounds, they're uncovering information that, as a researcher, I've been doing this kind of stuff for many, many years, most of my adult life, and I was absolutely not aware of much of what is in this documentary series. Thank you for tuning in today to Skywatch Television. I'm Tom Horn. I'll see you next time.
Coming this November.
I'm not sure that the world is ready to receive this.
Tom Horn. Joe Ardis, Donna Howell, and the Skywatch investigation team join a host of global experts in the conclusion of a multi-year undercover inquiry that exposes what the U.S. government, the FDA, and monster corporations have been hiding from you.
We're talking about everything from the food that we eat to animals and pet animals to ultimately humans. Literally, what we have been doing with genetically modified crops, what we have and are doing with transgenically made animals, we fully intend to do with the human race. I mean, how many people know right now that the last scientist in Congress, Bill Foster, recently spoke before Congress? He wrote an article for The Hill in which he says that right now the top science departments in our government that dole out taxpayer-funded revenue have already been ordered to literally create the guidelines that are going to be used for genetically modifying the human race.
I think 90% of Americans would be shocked if they learned that their cats and dogs were eating these diseased meats and euthanized pets.
During our investigation, we were able to verify that if your pet Fluffy had been euthanized at one of these vet clinics or one of these shelters, it would be recycled into food byproducts, toothpaste, cosmetics, deodorant.
The stench is overwhelming. It's unbelievable.
Coming in November, an unprecedented, official, and imposing undercover report that exposes what government agencies and greedy corporations are hiding about a genetic menace that is slowly, quietly, secretly killing and transforming all of creation.
They have made a Faustian deal with the devil. I'm talking about our government. They have sold out the best interest of Americans to greedy monster corporations that are in their back pockets.
Coming this November exclusively from Skywatch TV. Dead Pets Don't Lie. Inhuman the documentary. Survive the Future. Angels waging war in the unseen realm. Global events fulfilling biblical prophecy. Eternal life. What lies beyond mortality? From analyzing the paranormal from a biblical worldview to the discussion of cutting-edge science and technology. Conspiracy. Discovery. Special investigative reports. Unafraid to explore the challenging issues facing humanity. Welcome to another edition of Skywatch TV.
Hi, folks. This is Tom Horn coming to you once again from the beautiful studios here at Skywatch Television. And we're going to be talking today again with a good friend of mine, Steve Quayle. He is the executive producer of a brand new documentary film. This documentary, True Legends, is actually going to be a film series. This first one's called Technology of the Fallen, which is episode 1. We've been talking about that for the last 3 weeks. We had Timothy Alberino, who's also part of that film project, was here with us as well. But today it's going to be just me and Steve Quayle. And now we're going to be talking about his book, Xenogenesis. The back of this book, here's a line. It says, "This book reveals a future of terror that will soon face human beings. Monstrous creations are being developed with secret technology in laboratories around the world." Steve, great to have you here in the studio again. Tell me, what is this about?
Changing men into monsters. It's like we're stepping back in time in history with all the mythological creatures that people have read about, pretty much consigning them to the history of fairy tales. I chose the title Xenogenesis because it means adding a third pair of DNA strands, actually a third strand to a double pair, the double helix, turning it into a triple helix. And in essence, this is God's creation with the double helix, and someone wanted to tamper with it to create a third helix. And so Xenogenesis is just it really means a third beginning. It means outside of the original creation. Now, the subtitle of that is Changing Men into Monsters. And in Xenogenesis, as you and I have done so many shows, and you have posted on Skywatch TV, formerly Raiders News Update, a massive amount of effort, of money beyond anyone's imagination. Somebody's going to a lot of extreme measures to make sure that they can make Hitler's ultimate Nietzsche's actually Uberman or Superman. The thing is that the promise in the garden, ye shall be as God, knowing both good and evil, and you shall not surely die, is the mantra of the singularity people, the transhumanists, and what every day, even on Matt Drudge, we're seeing, eternal life, longevity, all of the issues that basically were in the Garden of Eden are now prominent in the headlines of the biggest news website on the internet. So why is that happening? Well, it's really simple. There is a desire to basically say, God, you really did a crummy job when you created humanity. That's instead of understanding the beautiful creation of mankind at the hands of an amazing God, they want to be God. Ye shall be as God, knowing both good and evil. So what I would call the Edenic or the Garden of Eden lie is now in the headlines of today, and transhumanism just simply means beyond human. It means we have crossed the threshold. We are going to become gods ourselves. And not only that, you'll never have to die, and you'll be able to have perpetual pleasure, perpetual perversion, and when your old body wears out, new body time. When your old brain wears out, we'll just add a few cells and carry on. Xenogenesis is critical. This is if you will, the end product of everything that my research has led to in the whole transhumanism singularity. And what we're talking about is The Age of Spiritual Machines by Ray Kurzweil. I propose this. The Bible teaches that demons are disembodied spirits. And the whole point of Xenogenesis, I believe, is to build a house for a lot of evil spirits that basically are going to come back into their original homes. But on the front cover of Xenogenesis, it shows a flying saucer beaming down a genetically altered child who's being held in a robotic hand with a double helix to the right and the left screen center of the image. Now, if a picture's worth 1,000 words, that's got to be worth 6,000 years, okay? When they found the tomb of Gilgamesh, the majority of countries and their special forces were hunting for one thing they wanted, and they wanted it very badly. They wanted the DNA of the half-man, half-god, who was literally the hero in a poetic narrative that's at least 4,000 years old. Now, in writing Xenogenesis, it became apparent to me that there's a group of individuals that literally are working night and day to trace the bloodlines of the giants down through history to identify those markers, and then to genetically, based on the blood they find and tissue that's recoverable, literally clone the previous homes of those entities in history we would know as some of the most ruthless, cruel mass murderers, and it's basically like they're coming back. If people think that's tough to really embrace, they should know that whatever scientific discovery is put forth into the public, that's already a fait accompli. The feat has been accomplished. When you talk about the return of Hitler to the headlines, now that's an interesting story, because Dr. Mengele and the other Nazi scientists, especially medical profession, they had perfected cloning, and a lot of people don't get that. But the idea of the ability to procreate and then recreate man in their image versus God's image is the central theme, because we've seen all the Star Trek episodes, we've seen Gattaca, we've seen all of the Hollywood presentations of spiritual machines like demon-possessed trucks and everything else. But what is lost to most people is this is a pre-programming presentation from some very dark powers, and it's interesting how it's becoming more and more evil. In other words, the contempt for humanity is accelerating to such a degree that it's kind of like the Matrix. Okay, there is a control mechanism behind the scenes, and it's not just the banking families of Europe. It is a supernatural group of entities, and this is something people have got to understand. Fallen angels do not die. They are incapable of dying. No matter what Hollywood tells you, you can't. Now, a giant could be killed, and that giant spirit became a demon. We've talked about that. But now there's a combination of technology and true spiritism taking place. And what has to fit into this, the missing link to a certain point, was the DNA of the giants, and the desire now, with the technology having come to the point it's come, they can do exactly what they were forbidden to do in Eden. Now, Adam and Eve walked with God in the cool of the morning. Everything that the devil has done through technology, through the fallen angels, through all of the different people that have yielded to him, is to destroy the human race. And that race right now is in the human race. We're right at the point. It is my contention. Forget all the charts, forget all the graphs, forget all you know. But right now, through biological selective genetic engineering and the availability of bringing into being hybrid viruses, for instance, Ebola pox, we're in a time period now. There's never been a time like it. It's that time period where in essence, it's a microbiological Tower of Babylon, but the Tower of Babylon's inverted, going right down into hell.
Well, and now even some of the authorities are starting to admit to stuff that you and I have been talking about.
Yes.
You've been writing about for the last few years. You know that we're producing a documentary right now called Inhuman. It's been years in the making. We've traveled around the world. We've talked to members of the current U.S. President's Council on Bioethics is in this documentary. We've talked to the world's leading transhumanist authorities. We've also talked to people like yourself and Chuck Missler and others that approach this from a prophetic point of view. But now, in just recent months, with the advent of CRISPR technology, which has been around since really kind of, the last 3 or 4 years, but they perfected some of the last phases. And now they're saying it's a very powerful, almost 100% accuracy in CRISPR technology to edit the human genetic code and to even introduce new streams of code that could produce inhuman, non-human, final phases of humanity. Xenogenesis, in other words, was prophetic. You wrote this only just a few years ago, and we're making it for the first time available to our audience. But yet now it's coming true. Here's a line. This was in a Reuters news story. I just wrote this down earlier today. The National Academy of Sciences and the National Academy of Medicine have announced that they are launching a major international initiative to develop guidelines for human gene editing. So now you've got the national laboratories, the highest levels of taxpayer-funded laboratories in the nation, saying this is going to happen. We're going to have to create guidelines about how we're going to proceed forward with the editing of the human genetic code. But what you're saying is this is a fulfillment of prophecy. Before they said it, Jesus said it, as it was in the days of Noah, right?
Absolutely. And let me say this, the people that screw up something usually can't fix it up, okay? We can see just any day in the headlines that's being fulfilled. I mean, how many pages of laws have to be written before somebody says, look, why don't you just do it this way? And, obviously common sense doesn't need 50,000 pages of explanation. But what's fascinating to me, like Elon Musk and others, Steve Wozniak, some of the smartest guys out there, billionaires by their efforts and bright guys. These guys are not, let's just say, putting ice cream cones in their foreheads. Okay, that's one of my favorite things because it basically shows futility. But I maintain that it's going to be a losing battle. Because I believe right now evil is loose on the planet. And Jesus said, except the days were shortened, for the elect's sake, the days are going to be shortened, there will be no flesh left alive. So what we're seeing now, in my opinion, is the full implementation of, again, Nietzsche's Superman. We're seeing the complete, how would I say this? The complete culmination, if you will, and implementation of the Nazi dream. We're talking about a technocracy that's going to be basically run by supposedly people that are brighter than the machines they're building, but then they want to make sure they give the machines more brightness than they had just in case. The thing is, it's the rule of unintended consequences.
Yeah, well, and if people think that anything we're talking about here today is a stretch of the imagination, I can sympathize with them wanting to believe that because it almost sounds too futuristic, like this can't possibly be going on in the world, around the world today. And yet you've got the Academy of Medical Sciences out of Britain, which is their equivalent to our FDA, publishing a report talking about animals with human genetic material to the point of human cognition and even to the point of being able to procreate across species barriers. They're saying that thousands of these have already been created. They're saying that thousands of laboratories are creating these, creatures from the island of Dr. Moreau.
It is Dr.
And they're
Moreau.
saying it's so widespread that we need international policy now to kind of rein this in. Again, we're talking about the Academy of Medical Sciences. You've got the Jasons. This is the most celebrated scientific body that offers policy advice to the United States Pentagon, to the Department of Defense, and them publishing reports. And of course, if we get copies, we're only getting the summaries of the reports. We're not getting all of the details. Some of this is being leaked to people like at Wired Magazine, Noah Shackman at Wired Magazine, people like that. And we're getting the summaries. And they're saying, you have got to get ahead of this technology because future battlefields are going to be fought by super soldiers, and they're saying they're going to be partly genetically modified. This is all literally in the news today.
Can I tell you something? It's the damned of yesterday. What I mean by that, when you look into the history of let's say Atlantis, Lemuria, Mu, Hyperborea, Thule, some people pronounce it Ultima Thule, all of the Shangri-La, all the areas that the world talked about the golden age, what brought them down was basically the genetic manipulation between animals and human beings. Now, a lot of people can't go there because they can't imagine a time period, prior to Adam and Eve. We'll leave that for another topic and another war. But the point being is that what we're seeing right now is literally we are recreating Terminator, Skynet, okay? Well, it doesn't take one to do too much reading of going back to history. Look at how when that movie came out, it was, quote, science fiction. Now it's science fact. I mean, major tech giants are being called Skynet, okay? Autonomous killing machines are, they're from blimps to dogs to anything that runs, jumps, or flies is being turned against us. Micro drones. And we're talking now the smallest nano weapons. When you get into the technology that's available, isn't it interesting? At the end of the day, it's all designed to kill. Okay, and that's the thing that we have. Well, it'll help the man who lost a leg, grow a new leg. No, it won't. They don't want any infirm people. Remember this: in a perfect society, imperfection has to be done away with. And so what we're seeing right now is, I see it this way: the devil, the adversary of men's souls, sold willing dupes the idea that if you just link up with me, you guys can do a better job than God did. You won't die. You won't have sickness. You won't have disease.
Sure.
By the way, your bank account will never run empty, and neither will your desire or lust go unfulfilled, okay? And then more than that, it's not enough to go after, human beings in a lusting way. I'm not condoning. I'm saying this is what they think. They've got to create new creations, and I won't go into it in detail. It's in my book. And by the way, this book is not written for children. This is written for grown-ups who have to grow up in their thinking. One of the concerns that Tom and I have, ladies and gentlemen, is the church is unaware of what's coming at it. Now, I've seen hokey articles where the church is going to have to deal with all this stuff. They don't understand the spiritual nature of it. So that's what we're doing, hopefully, by having these TV productions on Skywatch TV. We're trying to appeal to a mass crowd to think, where does it lead? Again, if you understand the fruit of evil, if you understand the root of evil, it's pretty well to predict the fruit of evil. And that's what you and I have been doing since we've been in talk radio for, 10 years?
Yeah, but it always seems like humans, we have this weakness to always fall back into the same trap. You mentioned a moment ago, like the Garden of Eden, right? Ye shall be as gods. But the unintended consequence is death and destruction.
Yes.
So you're promised immortality, you wind up with death and destruction. Here we are again, the days of Noah, right?
Right.
And all of these talking heads, everybody from Ray Kurzweil to everybody's out there right now, they're talking about the coming technological singularity. They were talking about the genetics revolution. And what are they saying once again? Ye shall be as gods. We're going to reach immortality, right? Our very, very long extended lifespans, 1,000 years of life. We're going to cure all these diseases. But what are the unintended consequences? I mentioned the Jasons a moment ago. One of the other reports they put out recently was called the $100 Genome Implications for the Department of Defense. And if you read it, all they're talking about is genotype and phenotype. And for people that are watching this program, if you remember your basic biology in school, genotype, that's what you're born with. That's the blueprint of what makes you a human. But phenotype is how it is expressed. It's how you walk, it's how you talk, it's your, what we would call natural human behavioral, you have eyes.
The inherited characteristics.
And what the Jasons are saying, though, is as you start tweaking the genotype, they're going to take on phenotypic alterations. They're going to start walking different. They're going to think different. They may see that might be like trying to have a conversation with a wolf, right?
Yep.
Their whole instinctive evaluation of humans could be something entirely different. And so that's the unintended consequences. And so, like in the book of Revelation, when it talks about end times prophecy, and it talks about people, so many being destroyed by these angels that are coming out of the ground, all these other things are happening, but it also talks about how many are being killed by the beasts of the field.
Yep.
Something weird is going on there, right?
Absolutely. Even we'll give a heads up. One of the newest movies coming out of Hollywood, obviously, is August. When we're recording this, is about the animals that turn on mankind. Well, we know that's already happening. People have been saying, gee, I can't understand why all the crows and the hawks and the eagles are multiplying at such a great rate. It's something out of the norm, Mm-hmm. Well, I can tell you why. Dinner, and I mean that is that we're now seeing. And I'll explain that because one of the books of in the book of Revelation, one of the chapters that specifically speaks to that very issue, that the beasts of the field, and obviously God calls it, the great meal prepared for them. And here's the thing, Tom, that people have got to understand. This is relevant, this is relevant, this is relevant. They want you destroyed. They want your family destroyed. They have a contempt. Who is they? It is the fallen angels. It is the, if you will, the genetic byproducts of sin, rebellion, and technology. Let's see, sin, SRT. Okay, it's the SRT factor, sin, rebellion, technology. The combination of those, the end product is the total obliviation. There's a word, it's oblivion, but we'll just call it obliviation. The end of humanity. And Jesus himself, again referring to this, he said, if the days weren't shortened for the elect's sake, there'd be no flesh left alive. Mm-hmm. That means Adam and Eve's seed would not be here. Mm-hmm. But for the elect's sake, those days are going to be shortened. Well, the fascinating thing to me is a statement, I think, that there's two time periods. There's a time period up until that where we are now, but everything's accelerated. And now we're in that time period where Jesus said, if I told you earthly things and you believe me not, how can I tell you heavenly things? Well, now what we're telling people is the fallen angels in the realm of heavenly things have come to earth and been here for a long time, and they've been orchestrating the scenes from behind the curtain, if you will. And it is my understanding, talking to military, intelligence, and scientists, some who have run for their lives, some who are dead now, but that the advanced combination, the chimera-like experiments. I had a guy who admitted to being an assassin say, it made me cry, I couldn't stand it. But he said, when you see half humans combined with animal DNA and they're its, and they're screaming, help me, he said, look, I'm cold-blooded. And he even told me, he said, I'm going to hell. But he said, that's not right.
Well, and again, the Academy of Medical Sciences, some of the top policy wonks in the world right now are saying that this technology is happening. In fact, the Academy out of Britain said most of the world have no idea to the extent to which these thousands and thousands of creatures are being made. We've got Steve Quayle here with us again today. He's been here with us for the last 4 weeks. We had Timothy Alberino. We're talking about their brand new documentary, Technology of the Fallen, which we are making available to you for $24.95 in our store at skywatchtv.com. Click on the store link, or skywatchtvstore.com. You can also get that with the David Flynn collection for $39.95. That's normally $60. We also are making 3 of Steve's books available. We just barely even touched on this today. Xenogenesis, changing men into monsters. You're going to read this book. It is going to scare you, but it'll hopefully make you pray when you understand what is happening in laboratories around the world, and the documentation, the endnotes are in there. They're exhaustive. We're putting that together with Angel Wars, the very creatures that are at war still with humanity, Aliens and Fallen Angels, those 3 books. We're throwing this one in for free, Long Walkers, which is a novel that was written by Steve Quayle and Duncan Long. And those would normally, together, those 3 books with that book would sell for $128. We're making them available for $99. Well, folks, it's always good to be with my good friend Steve Quayle. Steve, thanks. We're going to have you back on very soon. The documentary will be available through us first, and I know you're already moving on to shooting part 2, a second documentary, because it's going to be a whole series, maybe as many as 10 entries. You have a huge budget, thanks to the Lord, to be doing this literally boots on the ground in Peru and some of these other exotic locations where there are megalithic structures that they believe were built by fallen angels, and also by the giants who were the offspring of those fallen angels. Steve, you got about 15 seconds to give us your last commentary. What's happening? Are we in the days of Noah?
Absolutely. We are so far into the days of Noah that any day now, and this is not an exaggeration or a license, creative license, any day now you will watch the headlines and more stories will be coming out of chimera-like creatures. You know, they're going to want to bring this back, reconstitute this, and it's way beyond woolly mammoths, you know, and it's way beyond the caveman, which I obviously don't buy into that. But so, I want to thank the listeners. And by the way, Tom, we're in the process of raising the money. The first one that we did, True Legends, episode 1, that costs a lot of money. And to do this, we actually are asking for people, pray about getting involved with us, because they are going to be done right. Both Tim and I have purpose in our hearts. We're not doing it halfway, or we'll do what has to be done.
People can find out more about that at stevequayle.com.
Yeah, stevequayle.com, and they can go to they can go to our website, truelegendtheseries.com. They'll see a 5-minute presentation, and then again, you'll be the one that will also be sending you snippets of it so people can see it. The second one is actually done. We were able to shoot so long and with such intensity that obviously we do them as fast as we get the cash in to do them.
Right. All right, folks. stevequayle.com, truelegendstheseries.com. Thank you for joining me again for this broadcast of Skywatch TV.
Coming this November.
I'm not sure that the world is ready to receive this.
Tom Horn, Joe Ardis, Donna Howell, and the Skywatch investigation team join a host of global experts in the conclusion of a multi-year undercover inquiry that exposes what the U.S. government, the FDA, and monster corporations have been hiding from you.
We're talking about everything from the food that we eat to animals and pet animals to ultimately humans. Literally, what we have been doing with genetically modified crops, what we have and are doing with transgenically made animals, we fully intend to do with the human race. I mean, how many people know right now that the last scientist in Congress, Bill Foster, recently spoke before Congress. He wrote an article for The Hill in which he says that right now the top science departments in our government that dole out taxpayer-funded revenue have already been ordered to literally create the guidelines that are going to be used for genetically modifying the human race.
I think 90% of Americans would be shocked if they learned that their cats and dogs were eating these diseased meats and euthanized pets.
During our investigation, we were able to verify that if your pet Fluffy had been euthanized at one of these vet clinics or one of these shelters, it would be recycled into food byproducts, toothpaste, cosmetics, deodorant.
The stench is overwhelming. It's unbelievable.
Coming in November, an unprecedented, official and imposing undercover report that exposes what government agencies and greedy corporations are hiding about a genetic menace that is slowly, quietly, secretly killing and transforming all of creation.
They have made a Faustian deal with the devil. I'm talking about our government. They have sold out the best interest of Americans to greedy monster corporations that are in their back pockets.
Coming this November exclusively from Skywatch TV. Dead Pets Don't Lie. Inhuman the documentary. Survive the future.
The supernatural realm is real, and we humans are naturally curious about it. That's why there are so many television reality shows featuring ghost hunters and alien chasers and mediums and psychics. Now, by and large, the Christian church avoids these controversial topics, even though we have the authoritative book on the subject. That's our mission at Skywatch TV, is to address issues of the paranormal and the supernatural from a Christian, a biblical perspective. But we depend on your support to do it. To find out how you can support Skywatch TV prayerfully and financially, please log on to our website, skywatchtv.com. And keep watching as we keep watch at Skywatch TV.